This is a story of adventure, of men who sailed across unknown seas to find unknown lands. The story begins where even today we can find sailors telling of faraway places as they have done for hundreds of years. Our story of exploration begins more than 500 years ago. In 1400, the world that the Europeans knew was something like this. All the dark areas were unknown. Among the very first to explore the unknown seas were the men of Spain and Portugal. In Portugal, the city of Lisbon was an important seaport. Today, Lisbon is still Portugal's main outlet on the Atlantic Ocean. In the early days of exploration, when the Portuguese put to sea in small sailing vessels, they often passed this tower of Lisbon harbor, a landmark for ships. In the history of the early Portuguese explorers, one of the great heroes of the age was Prince Henry the Navigator. He devoted all his life to inspiring, organizing, and directing voyages to explore the coast of Africa and to find a water route to India. Many of Prince Henry's fleets sailed from the Portuguese town of Lagos. Nearby, at Cape St. Vincent, Prince Henry established his headquarters. In the distance is Cape St. Vincent. On this great promontory, Prince Henry built an observatory and a school for the scientists and scholars he employed. Today, there's not much left of what we might call Prince Henry's Naval Research Center. But the work done here affected the whole age of discovery. Prince Henry improved the design of ships and built many vessels here in Lagos. The small, swift Portuguese ships, not much larger than this craft, were considered the best vessels of their time. They were called caravels. Prince Henry supplied his sailors with many ships of this type. He employed the best map makers of his time. He improved navigation instruments, such as the astrolabe and the mariner's compass. No wonder the Portuguese sailors could say, "We went out well taught and provided with instruments and rules." First, the islands of Madeira and the Azores were discovered. Then, year after year, Prince Henry's ships pushed southward along the coast of Africa. Finally, in 1488, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the tip of Africa and called it the Cape of Good Hope, which meant the hope of reaching India. Meanwhile, another country was hoping to find a water route to India. That country was Spain, Portugal's neighbor. What was Spain like in the 15th century? Many Spanish cities had defense works, such as this fortified bridge and this castle. These were the days of frequent fighting between the Moors and the Spanish princes. What kind of men were these Spaniards who lived during the age of exploration? Some of them were educated aristocrats. Many were soldiers, fighting men used to danger and excitement. Many were friars and priests of the Catholic Church, eager to spread the gospel to new lands. And some were men seeking personal glory and adventure. One of the greatest adventures in all history began in Spain in 1491. In that year, a man named Christopher Columbus was staying here in the convent of La Rabida in southern Spain. He rested in the convent while waiting for an interview with the King and Queen of Spain. Columbus stayed in this very room. Here, his friend, the head of the convent, advised him not to give up hope of seeing the Spanish rulers. For 20 years, Christopher Columbus had dreamed of his great enterprise. It was a daring scheme for sailing to the Indies. Finally, Columbus journeyed to Granada to present his idea to the King and Queen. At the royal court, Columbus presented his plan to the two sovereigns of Spain, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. What was this great enterprise which the navigator proposed to these monarchs? Columbus explained his plan. He could reach India, he said, not by going around Africa, as the Portuguese were trying to do, by sailing straight westward across the unknown ocean. But Columbus failed to convince the Spanish monarchs. Weary and discouraged, he left the royal court. However, when he reached this bridge, a messenger from Queen Isabella overtook him. Columbus was told he could have ships and men. And ever since, this bridge near Granada has been called the Bridge of Good Tidings. This contract, drawn up by the Spanish rulers, gave Columbus 3 ships and the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea. At the port of Palos in Spain, 3 ships were made ready for Columbus: Santa Maria, Nina, and Pinta. On August 3rd, 1492, the ships left Palos harbor and stood out to the open sea. From Palos, Columbus sailed westward over seas that no man had ever seen. Day after day, the great admiral guided his ships. Westward, ever westward he sailed, hoping to reach India or the island of Japan. But Columbus didn't know that a whole continent lay between Europe and Asia. When he sighted land on October 12, 1492, Columbus thought he had reached the Indies. He never knew that his 3 ships had arrived at a new continent. Meanwhile, the men of Portugal were not idle. From this seaport town of Sines in Portugal came a sailor who made another glorious voyage of discovery. His name was Vasco da Gama. He fulfilled Prince Henry's dream of reaching India by way of Africa. Da Gama sailed from Lisbon in 1497. Following the route that Diaz had explored, Da Gama continued around the Cape of Good Hope and on to India. And so, Prince Henry's dream came true. Meanwhile, Spain was developing the lands Columbus had found. The city of Seville was the headquarters for overseas business. In the old port of Seville, we can still see the building called the Exchange, in which some of Spain's overseas business was handled. Here, in this so-called Tower of Gold in Seville, were kept the precious metals and jewels that came from the New World. From the port of Seville, Ferdinand Magellan sailed on a voyage that answered the final question of exploration. Leaving Seville, Magellan sailed southwest along the coast of South America, rounded the southern tip, and continued westward. Finally, he reached the Philippines. Here, Magellan was killed, but one of his ships continued on. Magellan's men reached the Cape of Good Hope and then followed the familiar route back to Seville, a complete trip around the world. Now, in the last chapter of exploration, came more men from Spain and Portugal. Men like Francisco Pizarro, conqueror of Peru, and Hernando Cortez, conqueror of Mexico. These daring soldier explorers were called conquistadores, the conquerors who explored the new lands, founded settlements, and set up governments. The accomplishments of the conquistadores were many. Balboa explored Central America and discovered the Pacific. Ponce de Leon explored Florida. Cortez conquered Mexico. In North America, Coronado explored the Southwest. De Soto, exploring the Southeast, discovered the Mississippi. In South America, Pizarro conquered Peru. De Sousa and others explored Brazil. And even the distant islands of the Philippines were conquered. These regions were part of the new lands that daring sailors had found across the seas. But the achievements of the Spanish and Portuguese explorers resulted in more than glory and riches. Their voyages helped to push back the unknown frontiers to give us the world as we know it today.